Hey guys, welcome to the Full Quadrant podcast. I'm joined here with Michael, my co-host from Las Vegas. How's it going, Mike?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Have you guys started
Awesome.
cooling down there yet?
Yeah, we have 100-degree weather now, which is good. It's
Nice. We
it's in
actually have,
the mornings are in the 70s, so that's good.
yeah, we have really nice weather right now. It's actually fall is like my favorite time of year. So I'm excited for it. It's great for the dogs, great for training, great for just all around living. So anyways, today is episode 14. Can't believe we've made it this far.
Yeah, it's
What
good.
are,
I mean, we're gonna keep going.
what are your thoughts?
See what we can get to.
Yeah.
It's um it's not easy doing podcasts and coming up with topics and things like that,
It's a
especially when you're doing it on a regular basis.
it's a big
You know,
production. I have a lot of respect for the people that put content out regularly and frequently. It's a tall order. But I think today we have a great conversation topic for discussion for those that have, been through the schools or in any corner of modern dog training that has been influenced by, NePoPo and Bart and Michael Bellin. The term the mother language has probably been bounced around in a few circles. And I thought it'd be a really interesting thing to talk about today. I've been in the middle of like going through the learning process. I've got a young dog I'm working with, a puppy, and so it's been really on the top of my mind. How do I structure this dog's learning? How am I setting him up for his education and his behaviors for later in life? What do I want in the future? And how do I reverse engineer that? So I thought it'd make a great conversation to discuss the mother language. And I'm not talking about Russia.
yeah, mother language. It comes up in the schooling and talk about it, and everybody has dealt with it with dealing either with a brand new dog, a puppy, or with a dog that already has previous experiences and they take over from somebody else or they're training for somebody else.
Yep.
So you have to keep it in mind when you're training. But what is the mother language? Right? And when we talk about it, the mother language is basically the first things you teach to a dog um, when you get it, and of course, especially a puppy, because with a puppy, those first few weeks, the dog is a sponge, so it's taking in everything and it's remembering everything and having experiences. So when you first do start that kind of training, you should be thinking about what direction you want the dog to go. Whether it's a pet, whether it's a working dog, sport dog, what kind of sport, and thinking about what is the most important aspect of those things that your dog is going to have to be proficient at. And then that's where you create the mother language, where you start the first thing you start training, and which becomes the most valuable thing for the dog, are those first behaviors that you're going to need down the road for whatever direction you're going.
Like you said, whether you're purposely trying to implement a specific mother language or you have acquired a dog, maybe it's a client dog or it's a dog that you're rescuing from a shelter or you've bought a dog or taking in a dog from a different owner, you're going to in one way, shape, or form, you will have to deal with and face that particular dog's mother language. And like you said, it's their first experience in which they view the world and how they approach problem solving and behaviors, right? So for me, I also think there's a physiological component to it. And for those that have read the talent code, we understand that myelin is created through repetitions, right? And especially with a young dog, and I'll talk a lot about the puppy I'm working with now, the first thing you do with that dog becomes something so valuable to the dog. It's something that they just enjoy because it's their first interaction with you. It's their first learning event. It's what they've learned allows them to unlock access in their lives to things that they want or to avoid things that they don't want. And so it becomes a very powerful worldview for the dog. And it's really physiologically, it's the myelin you've created. The mother language is the myelin you've created for habitual behaviors down the road, which is why it
Yeah,
becomes such a which is why it's almost second nature. It's reflexive to some dogs.
yeah. And that's the thing with when we talk about the mother language is a dog will default to that when they're unsure of something. If they're in a situation they're not sure of, they're going to default to that. And you see it in behaviors all the time, where the dog doesn't know what to do and for example, they'll go into the heel position because that's what that person most likely started with in their training. That's where you see pet dogs, because the first thing pet people teach is a sit. That's like every single person. That's what they teach, which I don't even teach a sit anymore. You don't, why teach a sit? That's the first thing they do. That's when you see the dogs, when they're unsure, the pet dogs especially just sit because they don't know what else to do. And
Right.
they know that that has been reinforced a lot and it's the strongest part of their language, of their behavior language.
And to add to that, it's not only when they're unsure, but it's when they get challenged or when they get stressed, right? And if you listened to our bonus track in episode 12, 2 episodes ago, after the credits rolled, we included a small snippet of a conversation that we had regarding stress in dogs, and the conversation around is stress good or bad for dogs. Would recommend that you go back to episode 12. If you haven't listened to the full thing, listen to it. But if you're, I mean, for sure, to keep up with this conversation, go back and listen to the Easter egg that we left for our viewers and listeners about stress. Because when a dog gets stressed as well, they will default to both their genetics and their initial learned frameworks, the things that they understand have unlocked or have been used to problem solve in their life, right? So it's not just when they're unsure, it's when they get stressed or when they get challenged that you will also see a reversion back to the mother language as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why when the difficult part for training is not training behavior, but it's thinking of, like you said, the framework of what you want for your dog and thinking of how it's going to impact what you're doing now is how it's going to impact the behavior later. Like you said, if the dog is stressed, what it's going to default to. And that's where the mother language comes in, where you teach that first so that if the dog is stressed, if the dog doesn't know what to do, it will default to that one thing where okay, that's good to happen in the moment that the dog is stressed.
And for example, this kind of follows what you're saying. This is why the selection of how you approach training a dog is really critical in setting the tone for your future performance. So let's assuming you have a dog with a job or a dog with a specific behavioral outcome later in its life when it matures, you need to ascertain, do I want to free shape this dog's behaviors and allow the dog to develop hunting behaviors where it learns to search for the answers in its life? Or do I want to lure the dog and make the dog dependent on guidance from its handler or its owner, right? And we can talk about this maybe down the road here or a little later in this podcast, but if you're talking about sport dogs, there are certain sports that are more routine than others. Some sports have more surprise scenarios or are more unpredictable in the exercises that the dog will be required to perform in which case for me the way I look at those things is a dog I'm setting up for a surprise scenario or a more mixed bag of a sport. I'm going to want to free shape that dog so that dog has it defaults to problem solving. When it goes down one path and hits a dead end, I want it to think, oh, maybe I can go around it. Maybe I can find another pathway. I don't want the dog to just sit there and just, like you said, go into a sit because it's exhausted its entire repertoire of behaviors, right? I want it to be creative versus, and I'll say this about IGP, it is a lot more routine. It doesn't mean that free shaping doesn't make a good dog in IGP either, but in certain cases, I think luring has become so popular with the IGP community is because they only want you to do a limited number of things and they don't want the level of creativity because the creativity is not required in that sport.
Talking about that, you could do free shaping, just general free shaping to have creativity in the dog, but the behaviors that you are going to need for IGP just lure them. So, they're not, those behaviors are not, the dog doesn't hunt for them and learn how to do them on its own.
Right.
You're telling them what to do. But at the same time, just general free shaping, not for, just just to make the dog creative.
And you make a good point that you can simultaneously free shape to generate and foster creativity in the dog while creating behaviors through luring or direct reward methods. That's definitely, I mean, and we're not promoting one or the other. We're just discussing why you would use one or the other and the circumstances in which. But at the end of the day, whether you're doing a dog for scent work, obedience, dock diving, protection sports, hunting, even, beginning with the end in mind is going to be the best way to structure your training, right? Because if you know what you want in the end, if you know what type of problem solving you want your dog to default to, by starting with that in the beginning, that's going to set you up for more success down the road than trying to teach the dog to be a problem solver once he's already gone through very rote training methodologies, right? Trying to add that in after the fact is a lot more difficult than it is to start with that as the mother language in the beginning.
The other thing with mother language is it can be the environment. For example, people see it all the time that if you go to the training field and only do bite work, that training field, the mother language for that training field is bite work. The dog will not be able
They
to
won't
think
switch
about anything
gears.
else.
They won't be able to
Yeah.
switch gears and think about obedience or think about tracking or relaxing even because that's
Yeah,
important as
because that environment is for one thing and one thing only, you've created from the beginning, and that goes to the point of thinking about where you want to finish and creating your training plan to fit into that. So for that, don't always go to that field and do bite work. You know, sometimes, like I said, go and just relax. Sometimes go in and do obedience. Sometimes go and do tracking, so that the dog, there's no set thing for that field. It's just whatever you tell it you're going to do. Which goes to the point of adding a cue to let the dog know what, especially for IGP, what phase you're in. Which is that's the difficult part of the training is remembering to do that every time and setting your routine and
having a
having
very
it the
yeah,
same.
having a very rote ritual so that you can put the dog in the mindset you want him to be in before you're required to perform a certain way. It makes me think so like one of the things I've been working on with my puppy is I started showing him just anything. I was shaping for, he'd walk out, he'd go sniff a tree. I'd click, he'd come back to me, get his reward. He'd run out, he'd jump on me. I'd click on him, reward him. He's doing anything. I'm just lots of so he has a very open and wide open range. He's willing to go anywhere because there's a possibility that something good happens by going into that space, whether it's a tight space, a dark space, a crawl space, whatever. Just recently, I started teaching him to indicate by downing at an article for tracking purposes. And that was the first thing I showed him. And then I went to start shaping him to teach him to shaping the unforced forced fetch, where you shape the dog going to the PVC pipe, putting his nose to it, touching it, biting it, holding it. And he took it, he bit it, he held it, and then he put it down in between his legs and he laid down. And he indicated on it after he put it down. Like, so he held it, he got clicked and rewarded, but then he took it and put it down and then purposefully indicated at the PVC pipe because it's almost like it's about 6 inches. It's like a small PVC pipe for him to hold, and it's similar in size to like a tracking article. I can see how he'd make the mistake, and it made me think about like, oh, he in that moment he just reverted back to his
He
mother language.
defaulted to,
Yeah,
yeah.
he defaulted to the exercise that he thought would get him another reward or reward event, which was indicating at something that is similar dimensions, right? It was just really
Yeah.
interesting to me.
Going with your puppy, how did you start the clicker with him? Did you start did you charge it or did you just start like
So I didn't start using it until I knew he had really high drive for his food. And it was interesting when I got him, he was jet lagged coming from a completely different time zone. And the transition to a new food and I've been told that sometimes dogs just traveling internationally can take a week or two to like kind of like readjust and reset their systems, which certainly for him it took about a week. And then his appetite came rip roaring. Like now he can't eat enough. Like I mean, I feed him probably more than he should be fed, and he still can't have enough of it. So I waited. I wasn't shaping out or I wasn't clicking. I wasn't doing any training. I was just trying to get him to eat. And then once his appetite came crashing in, that's when I was like, okay, now's the right time to start clicking, and I'd click and pay, or click and feed, and that's when I introduced the clicker, and it took literally one session, and he was charged.
and that's the thing. What is giving value to the clicker only takes the value of whatever you're giving the dog. So if you start when the dog finds no value in the food, then there will be no value in the clicker.
Yes, is that the, I mean, is that the mother language at play? If have you implemented a weak mother language for the clicker by doing that way?
I have way back when I did when I thought about less about everything I was doing and was just following this kind of steps, you know. I did like I would just click feed, click feed, but then I started seeing that yeah, the value wasn't there, and it was because the value for the food wasn't there, especially for some of these pet dogs. So then I started going to, okay, when you show me value for the food, now I'll add the clicker to that so that it takes the value I want.
Right.
You know?
And that's okay to wait. It's actually preferred that you do wait until, because you don't want to, again, it's like the way Bart and Michael teach the recall. It's like when the dog is running to you, you
Yeah.
recall them. You say
You,
here or come at the moment when they're running their fastest. You don't
yeah.
say it before they've started running, which is what
Yeah.
most people traditionally will say. They'll say someone, like maybe you're doing a restrained recall with a partner, they hold the dog, and maybe the dog's not even trying to pull to you, and then you say here, and then you try to coax the dog into you, which is the chicky chicky chaka style of
Mhm.
dog training. And now you've got a
Yeah.
really weak recall. The dog is very like unmotivated to come back to you.
Yes. It's the same as the hold, right? The unforced force fetch.
Sure.
Um, like, don't name the hold until the dog really wants to grab that PVC.
Right.
When the dog shows desire and is like grabbing with power, now that's the time to name it because now you're naming the emotion, the desire, the motivation, everything goes into that cue,
Yes.
right? And that's why I think the fear of falling behind stops people from waiting until the motivation and power is there.
Our impatience and our own dopamine addiction gets in the way of the successful outcomes of training our own dogs, because we want to see the results now versus letting the dog present the right behavior and then name the behavior. We want to know that we can get a dog to sit on command regardless of
Yeah,
quality of that behavior.
which is the same as I see with some people try to use the clicker as a recall and the dog doesn't respond because there's no value. There's not enough value. They never built the value in the clicker. And I tell people, don't use it as a recall. You could eventually because once you have the value, but in the beginning you can't because it doesn't have the emotion and the desire built into it
Yeah.
yet, which is going to the mother language, you know, teaching your markers. The first markers you teach will be strong, but not only because you taught them first, but the way you teach them, which is what we just explained.
Before we hopped on this recording, I was out and about. I had to drop off our snowblower for a yearly service before we start getting snow on the ground out here in a couple months. And I took the puppy along with me, walked him into the store, and this is a different dog than I've brought up from a puppy before. Like all my other dogs, I had a little bit more control on, but this dog, I'm really like, he wants to eat something. If it's a leaf, I'm kind of just letting it go. Whereas before, I'd kind of like pop him and try to bring him back to me. I'm letting him put all this like put whatever he wants in his mouth, just about like again within reason. That's not going to hurt or kill him or do anything damaging to his system. But I'm letting him explore more than any other dog I've ever raised from a puppy. And he's in there, he's hopping around, he's sniffing, he's trying to crawl under a lawnmower. I mean, in the showroom. I'm just sitting there watching him do it, like, and I'm just like, it's so interesting because in the past, this juxtaposition of how I used to bring a dog up versus now, it's so different. But I'm really excited to see how this develops this individual dog for the future.
Yeah, because it's going to open him up. I think what happens there is people, when you put too much control in the beginning, and if you do it the wrong way, the dog is afraid to try things
Yeah,
because you think it's just control, but the dog a lot of times is viewing it as like an aversive, right?
right, right.
And they because they were exploring and trying to figure stuff out, and you are sitting there basically telling them you're wrong, you know, then that's when they stop trying, and now you have to guide them more than
Yeah.
teaching them like you don't make a mistake until you know that it's a mistake.
Right. It's like the cardinal sin in scent work where when the dog finally realizes that he doesn't know where it's at because you keep correcting him for doing so many things that are wrong, and then he just turns around and looks at you, he's like, all right, fine, since you apparently know where it's at, why don't you show me where it's at? And now the dog expects you to push them to the source of odor, which you can't do because you don't know. I mean, in a real scenario, but if you're in training, you end up kind of doing just that, and now the dog has become dependent on you to show them where the odor's at in the training situation, right? And you take them to the hide or you take them to the source.
Yeah, because what happens is if you give too much guidance before the dog knows where it is, and you give too much guidance, and then the dog ends up finding it, then the dog thinks, well, you know where it is, so I'll just follow your lead because you always show me where it's at. Even though you don't realize it, the person doing the handling doesn't realize they are actually showing the dog where it's at by guiding them too much when they're not on the right path
Yeah.
instead of letting them figure out. So then the dog will start defaulting to paying attention to the handler because they believe the handler knows where it is.
This actually makes me think, I saw on social media on Facebook, my buddy, and you know him too, Ricky Rivera. There was a law enforcement discussion thread that popped up from an anonymous poster who said he was just asking, he's like, hey, I just got a dog in for canine, his canine team. It's his new dog. It's a green dog. And he's like, I'm in the middle of the bonding period, which is like, it's a traditional thing for a lot of agencies to say, when you first get assigned your dog and you take the dog home to live with you, they just want you to spend time, sitting on the couch, playing fetch in the backyard, like building a bond. He said, "What else can I do to facilitate a faster bond with my dog?" And Ricky's comment, and there were a lot of other comments that were like, oh, like do a lot of feeding from the hand, or do this, or like, take him out in public and get him exposed to new things, which are all like decent pieces of advice. But like Ricky came in and said, "Hey, slap the collar on your dog. Start training your dog, right? From the moment you get your dog." It's a perfect example of what we're talking about with the mother language. If you want that canine to have respect for you, if you're worried about the dog coming up the leash or being respectful or biddable, in required situations, the first thing the dog needs to understand is that there has to be a degree of respect. And respect is established through consistent and fair training. And that's the reason is because you set the precedence that you are going to reward good behaviors and provide fair but appropriate consequences for unwanted behaviors. And when the dog sees that, it's no wonder why they would choose to self-direct towards and navigate towards things that are going to cause them to have good things in their life and avoid the things that are bad, right? It just makes so much sense. Like, dogs, they want to live their best life, right? And so if you show them how to, it's a very simple process to let them. They'll do that. They'll gravitate to that on their own. And I couldn't help myself, but I was like, this is the best piece of advice you'll see on this entire thread. Is to get the dog, train the dog, start using the collars, and just and not, again, not using the collar in like a brutal way or like an unfair way, but start showing the dog that you have the ability to influence its quality of life.
Well, like you said, starting to implement the consequences, right, for what it should be doing and what it shouldn't be doing right from the beginning, instead of trying being fearful of ruining your relationship, which from as far as people goes, and I think dogs too, if you always let the dog do whatever it wants with no consequences, then it actually loses respect for you, right? Because it's like you have no control over me. I do whatever I want.
Right.
But if you start implementing and being fair right from the beginning, then the dog goes, "Oh, okay, there's rules to everything, and I will start navigating, this world so I can avoid those consequences."
and and not to get too off topic here because I'm known for that, but like, every relationship, every successful relationship, whether that's a friendship, it can be a platonic relationship, a working relationship, a romantic relationship, any type of relationship, the successful ones are all founded or have a foundation of respect. That is the base layer of any successful relationship that you would ever examine, in any of the categories of relationships. Respect is the foundation. Now, a lot of people say, like, I mean, if you're talking like dating and like romantic relationships, there has to be attraction. But relationships with attraction that lack respect turn out to be very unhealthy, right? And it's the same thing for training. That's why train like people want to. They're like, oh, I want to be friends with my dog first, or I want to be friends with my kid, and then I'll be the disciplinarian later. No, set the boundaries, set the ground rules, make sure in a fair way, right? Obviously, we're talking not like a very fair, opportunistic way to live, in a relationship. When you have that, then you facilitate greater opportunity for better bonding with your dog, right? Training, and Bart and Michael have said this before, and but training is the best way to bond with your dog. No 5 mile hike once a day is going to do more for your bond than consistent short training sessions throughout that dog's life,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
You know, and
exactly.
so and so going for respect, and like what you're saying is where the dog understands, he understands the dogs thrive in consistency. When they understand something's consistent, that's where respect is formed, right? And when respect is there, now you have predictability. You know what the dog is going to do, and that's
Yeah.
super critical.
I think I don't remember who said it. It was like Jordan Peterson, I can't remember now. But they said when it comes to kids, that you should not be your child's friend. You should be their parent,
Yes,
right?
I 100% agree.
Later, once the kids grow up, now you can be their friend.
You have 50 years to be your kid's friend. You have 18 years to set them on a course that isn't going to derail them or land them in prison or injured or with a lifelong addiction to something that's like, going to ruin their life.
Yeah, that's where same thing with dogs. You need to be your dog's trainer, and the bonding will come through that, right?
Absolutely.
It's like there was a, some people I went to see the other day, and the dog was just unruly. And as soon as I put a leash on the dog, it just it stopped doing all that crazy stuff, you know? And I told him, I said, the dog doesn't know boundaries and it doesn't know any rules because it was a rescue they got, right? It doesn't know boundaries, doesn't know rules. I go, have a leash on the dog so you can start implementing those boundaries and those rules. So the dog starts learning what to do in the house and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Okay. And they were like, we thought that would be cruel. It wasn't that they were saying they weren't going to do it because they saw how quickly the dog just relaxed. And but they looked at it as cruel to have the dog under control inside the house, all day. But the point is not having the dog under control all the time. It's only until the dog learns the what it should be doing, and what
Right.
should it should not be doing,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and I think that happens a lot. I guess that's why we get called as to train their dogs. But it's the feeling that it's cruel where and in that case, I told him, I go, this dog has too many choices. It needs guidance, so it doesn't have, so you have to tell it what to choose. Because if it has too many choices, it doesn't know what to pick. I think that's like the definition of anxiety, right? Is having too many choices and not be able to focus on one.
Interesting.
Uh,
To kind of bring this back, letting a puppy do whatever he wants within a healthy reason and a safe reason is not the same thing as letting a canine do whatever he wants. Like they're they have
yeah,
different aims, right? They have different aims. They're coming from different places. So don't get mistaken that like, well, you just said that you're letting your dog do one thing, and then you're telling this other person that they need to put control and tools and all this stuff on there. It's a completely different thing. You're building a dog up to eventually where they're going to be ready for that and then implement that. But anyways, yeah, just want to make
yeah,
sure
but
I called that out.
yours is, yeah, but you're balancing it,
Yeah,
right? It's to a point. It's not 100%
right.
freedom.
Yes,
It's just enough so that you can open up the dog, but then later you are going to have training and you are going to have you're implementing rules inside the house, and in certain situations. So it's a balance rather than a 100% just do whatever you want.
correct.
You know?
Yes. Um, Now, with this, I think there's a good conversation to be had in talking about the mother language as it relates to different tools and different methodologies. We have a lot of different listeners that come from, they're just simply handlers. They might be hobby trainers, they might be hobby handlers, or they compete professionally or they train professionally. In any of those scenarios, we're going to deal with dogs that come to us with different mother languages that we have to know, and it's in our interest to do our best to find the history on that, right? Knowing a dog has
Yeah.
had a previous training experience with a maybe a bad experience with an e-collar, or maybe they're brought up as a puppy using an electronic fence where the e-fence is just strictly punitive e-pressure. They're going to carry that into training, and maybe they show complete aversion to what you're doing and have a really difficult time. So I think
And not only aversion, but like the fence, right? The fence would teach the dog to move away,
from pressure.
right? Whereas if a dog has been put on a bark collar, when you put on a collar later, the dog's default will be not to bark because they're like, okay, whenever I have a collar like this on, I don't bark and everything's fine, you know. So that part of the mother language is what you have to, if you like you said, if you take a dog in, you have to figure out how will the dog react if I use any tool on it. You don't want to find out by
Trial
what
and error.
happens to some people where they do the popo neigh, where one day they haven't put any tools on. Say they use a pinch collar, they haven't put a pinch collar on the dog, and one day they've been teaching the dog, and then they decide to give a correction. The dog doesn't understand the correction, and they might have had a different learning phase with that tool before they got it, and now it reacts in a way that you don't expect,
Right.
right? But that's why that mother language is important in figuring out what it was. So now you'll have a guideline of how the dog is reacting. So you know if you know where it started, you understand the reactions better. Then you know why the dog is doing what it's doing.
Absolutely. And this is why, I mean, in our last episode where we talked about the different applications of electric training collars, understanding what does the dog already know and then using that to your advantage. What is their mother language with a leash? Has the person inadvertently created major opposition reflex in this dog where they just pull on the leash, right? Or have they been maybe a little heavy on the leash and collar so that there's no opposition reflex where you want to, maybe you're in a protection training situation for a dog sport and you're trying to use opposition reflex, but it's not working the way you want it to.
Mhm.
Taking a step back to ask, hey, what's the dog's experience and past history in training or with tools? That can give you a lot of insights so that you don't screw up the training that you're trying to do
Yeah.
present moment.
And the mother language, as it has to do with tools, also goes to what we talk about in the dog being prepared for a correction that will inevitably come, right? The mother language goes there. If you're going to use a tool for a correction, you have to have introduced it during the learning phase, which is basically the mother language of the tool has to be taught to the dog before you can use it as a correction, be it pinch collar, e-collar, slip collar, food, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can't go straight to a correction with a tool until you have that mother language of that tool.
Yep. The other important thing to note about the mother language is knowing what you're trying to do and knowing that a mother language does exist is important because it also allows you to counteract the severe effects of creating a one-sided mother language, right? So maybe you have a dog that you want it to be a generalist or do many things really well. That's the value of modern dog training and what we learn in NePoPo is that when you teach one behavior, you automatically need to begin teaching the opposite behavior at the same time. So you create balance. Otherwise, you create a problem where you get entrenched and just dug in on the dog really loving and knowing the one behavior, but struggling to learn the opposite later on. So, for example, dogs that are going to compete in dog sports, if you teach the dog to bite and you flirt the dog up and you do all the bite development exercises without at some point simultaneously showing the dog the value of outing, down the road you're going to have a dog that only finds value in biting and has no value in outing, and then you have to be punitive on the dog. Whereas if you had set it up correctly, the dog would find equal value, well maybe not equal, but enough value to comply when given the bite command, and then also comply on the out command. And that's also very valuable. And same thing for like a dog that sniffs, right? You have a scent dog. Well, maybe you need the dog to search, right? You want him to sniff, but if he won't stop sniffing and he won't recall to you, now you have a dog you have to chase, miles away, right? There has to be balance, right? So the value in teaching opposites, like the mother language is important, but knowing that the mother language creates a tendency or a default reflex and a bias towards one thing, we can use that to our advantage. And that's the thing that has been really valuable to me in learning from Bart and Michael is that the value of creating balance in dogs, the opposite behavior is so important,
Yeah.
right?
But also going to that, when you're the way to teach it, like it's not teach the left-handed heel, and once that's done, teach the right-handed heel, right? It's bringing them up together. So you're teaching the left, you do reps of the left, you do reps of the right, you do reps of the middle. So they're balanced as you're teaching them in the same phases. Instead of concentrating on one, then concentrating on another, then concentrating on the middle, right? Same as you said. Don't concentrate on the biting and then later try to teach it out. You do it, you bring them up at the same time so that they're equal in value.
You Now, in dog training, nothing is absolute, right? I think we all agree on that. The and playing devil's advocate to what I just said and what we've just talked about, the time where it might be appropriate to delay maybe some of the alternate or the opposite behavioral learning is maybe you have a dog, and again, using bite sports as an example here, maybe you have a dog who is not really suited for the sport, but it's something you want to do with your dog. And maybe there's like moderate interest in it from the dog's perspective, but you want to make it more, then maybe you would try to create and put a lot of emphasis on the biting being a really fun activity. Maybe the outing is not going to be a hard thing for that dog because, he has or a predisposition not to bite, right? So you would maybe in that scenario you might delay it in favor of balancing the scales where the dog's out is here and the bite is not so weighted. You want to bring them into balance.
Well, yeah, well, that's the key. That's the whole point. The whole point of teaching behavior opposite behavior is keeping them balanced.
Yeah,
So in that case, it's already unbalanced,
yeah,
right? So you are trying to put more weight, say, on the biting to bring it back into the balance with the not wanting to bite, right? The outing.
right.
So I think that's a better way to put it is you want to keep balance in everything.
Yeah,
And
I
if
like
it's
that.
imbalanced, then you want to bring them back into balance.
Yeah, when you have a dog that's balanced, is the risk of his bite a problem? No, because you have control over it because you have balance and you have an alternative command or a cue that you can give him to stop that behavior when it becomes problematic,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right. Um, and with the mother language, the goal is that we create reflexive behaviors, behaviors that are on cue, heart and soul every time, right? They're instinctive.
In IGP, what would be the mother language to help you in that sport?
For me, my approach is you assess what the dog has as natural strengths, and then you make the mother language the place that he's weak so that that becomes strong. Because again, if the mother language takes on greater strength because it's the first thing it learns that brings good things into its life, that allows you to elevate that particular phase. So if that's tracking or if that's obedience or if that's protection, make the weakest phase for that dog its mother language. Because and again, I think I've talked about this and I do this with my personal dogs. I will assess them for what they have naturally. And what they lack, I will use that and make that their mother language so that it elevates their deficient phase or where I foresee them
Yeah,
having trouble in the future, right?
yeah, that's good.
And that's what I'm doing with this puppy. I actually I'm counting on his genetics to bring a really nice dog in protection, so I haven't really touched that. I'm expecting like his food drive to be really good and like my capabilities to train a dog in obedience, I don't really have too many questions there, so I'm not too worried about the B phase. But the tracking is something that I have less experience in, and I just want to make sure that that is a phase that I don't have to run into problems. So I've made that the mother language. I started out doing dopamine box style scent pads, dopamine box into his tiny food bowl, like using the food bowl as the dopamine box, and creating major attraction to those types of activities using opposition reflex, things like that. So that's what I've been doing with my current pup.
How old is it now?
It'll be 12 weeks this weekend, I think. So 3 months going
Okay,
on.
cool. Also, you didn't listen to the vet and wait until the last set of shots to take it out
Oh,
and
my
keep it
vet's not
away
like
from
that.
everything and
No, my vet's not like that. My vet's like, hey, first of all, they're like, every dog you bring to us, they tell me like every dog you bring to us is super well behaved. They're like, whatever you want to. Because I had questions. I'm like, how soon really is it advisable to allow a dog to be getting out in trafficked areas? And they're like, well, usually like once they've been started on their vaccines, they've got a moderate level of protection. You obviously want to avoid trafficked areas that are known, like dog parks and public like parks and things like that. That could be highly trafficked. But they're like, we trust you. You're gonna do the right thing for your dog. So I've been out and about with him. He's been to
That's where,
Shield.
yeah, that's where I asked, because I asked my vet specifically because they're like friends of the family, and he said after the second set of shots, they're pretty much covered, like
Yeah,
totally covered.
yeah,
The third one is just like extra, but they do have level immunity from their mother.
right.
And then after the first, every set of shots, they're enhancing that level. And like you said, if you're with my puppies, when I take them out right from 8 weeks, when I get them 9 weeks, whenever I get them, I'm just careful where I put them down.
Yeah, and what they sniff.
Yeah, but I still take them out to expose them to as much as possible.
Yeah, the sights and sounds are important. I mean, like today, I was at at the dealership, and I got out in the parking lot, walked to the street, let him observe cars flying by at 50 miles an hour. Obviously, he's on leash, you know.
That goes to the mother language, right? If your dog's mother language is staying in the house for the first 4 months of its life,
It only
right,
wants to stay in the house,
then that is what it knows, and now everything else, depending on genetics, everything else is like a scary world.
right?
But if you create again that mother language where the dog, again, going to balance, the dog is comfortable in the home, but it's also comfortable being out and experiencing different things. Now you're going to have a more stable dog when it gets older.
Right. So to recap, what are your important things to remember about the mother language?
Remember that your dog, in times of stress or of not knowing, is going to default to that mother language.
Again, not Russian, not the mother, not the
The other one is
Mother Russia.
Mother Russia. You like Mother Russia? I told you, touch nothing. The mother language of the tools.
Yep.
You can't expect to use them later, for one thing, until you introduce them in the beginning so they understand what they are. That's important. And then deciding on which direction your dog is going to go, to knowing what's going to be important that, should be the mother language of your dog.
Yes. What is the mother language of how your dog will interpret and process its problem solving approach to life when it runs into things that it's never encountered before? How is it going to process that stimuli? How is it going to process troubleshooting a scenario where it doesn't know how to find uh, find the answer? Right.
Exactly. Perfect. I think that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good. I mean, it's a short and sweet one, but I think it like this couldn't be more relevant for me because I mean it's been top of mind and there's a lot of people out there. And even if you get a dog that's not a puppy, you can still weave in and out and massage the mother language to work to your advantage. But you just have to be able to identify it.
Yeah, perfect.
Not all hope is lost if you feel like your dog's mother language is not what you want it to be. But you have to identify what it is before you can then make plans to work around it. Anyways, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Full Quadrant Podcast, episode 14. Mike, always good to talk to you.
Yeah, that was great. Looking forward to the next one.
All right. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later.